I think it was Vodi Bakum that had said that critical social theory kind of functions like a train, right? Where you've got the oppressed versus oppressor, that Marxism is the driving engine, and then the boxcars are all the different identities. And so, of course, disability is one of those boxcars. It's almost a copy paste
Mm.
of what you see in critical race theory, gender theory, except now it's disability. It's able-bodied versus disabled.
I've got a fascinating conversation for you today with my friend Ella, who goes by the Disapologist on social media. She goes by that name because she is a Christian, she's an apologist, and she has a disability. And she is pushing back against some of the unbiblical theology that surrounds the conversation of disability. Today's episode is brought to you by Brave Books, a Christian children's entertainment company. You can go to bravebooks.com/childers for 20% off your order. Okay, I am excited to bring you this conversation I had with Ella, but let me just kind of give us some context here. So maybe you've heard of critical race theory. Maybe you've heard of critical gender theory or critical queer theory, but maybe you haven't heard of a subset of the critical theories called disability theory, or it sometimes is referred to as disability justice or disability rights or disability inclusion. If you've heard some of these terms, we're going to put some flesh on this for you today and help you understand where this is coming from and where some of these unbiblical ideas come from. One of the highlights of today's conversation was when Ella gave her review of a book that's called My Body Is Not a Prayer Request. Now, this is a book that sold very well. A lot of progressive Christians supported and endorsed this book. There were even a lot of conservative churches that were doing studies based on this book because in the eyes of many people, this was the only resource that was available on this topic. But Ella is pushing back against that, saying, no, actually, some of the ideas that are in this book are really unbiblical. And what they end up doing in a similar way to critical race theory or critical gender theory is they make your disability kind of the central most thing about you, like your core identity. And then through the lens of this definition of justice that we see in our culture, that is less of a biblical definition, but more of one that would be like an equal outcome, well, then everything related to the disability conversation becomes a matter of oppressed versus oppressor. I'm telling you, this is fascinating. I think that if you haven't heard the term disability justice or disability theology, you're going to recognize some of the language as our conversation unfolds. So I hope that this conversation is powerful and encouraging for you. I think it will be, because I know that churches want to be welcoming to people with disabilities. We want to be places that are inviting people to come and providing ways to make that accessible for them. But there's a biblical way to do that and an unbiblical way to do that. And Ella's here to talk about it. So here is Ella, the Disapologist. Ella, it is so great to have you on the show. I've been really looking forward to this ever since we met this past summer at the Cross-Examined Instructor Academy, where you gave an incredible presentation. And I want to share some of that information with my audience today. But I want to start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
So my name is Ella, and I go by the Disapologist online because I'm a disabled apologist. That's my thing. I was born with a physical disability, um, and I saw a big gap. I have encountered a lot of bad theology about disability, but then Christians don't really talk about it that much. So I saw this as just a big gap that needs to be filled. And I felt that conviction. So I said, all right, here I am, Lord, send me. I guess if it's that important, I'm going to do it.
That's so great. And you are a pioneer in this field. I have to tell you, you're the only person that I know of that's even addressing this. And so let me
Yeah.
set this up, and I'd love to get your thoughts on, the way that I set this up, because I'm going to just give it to you from my perspective. So I have started to see this disability theology, which can mean different things. There's different buckets, as there is with any kind of theology that focuses on a particular intersection of identity, I guess you could say. But what I've started to see is this. Well, first of all, you see people making things like their biological sex or their ethnicity or their ability level, they start to make those their core identity, and almost like somebody might identify as LGBTQ, somebody might identify as disabled as their core identity. And so then you sort of, as I'm swinging out and I see the broader structure of, for example, critical theory, which examines all sorts of things through the lens of power dynamics and intersectionality, which is like the different types of oppression that you might have, and viewing things like oppressed versus oppressor, but then that being applied to the disability conversation. And I've started to see that happen, and I couldn't figure out at first what was going on. And then I have friends, of course, that specialize in critical race theory or critical gender theory. And I'm like, somebody needs to talk about critical disability theory and liberation theology as applied to disability and disability theology. So there's my intro. Maybe comment on that and tell us, what is disability? This is going to be brand new for so many people. So many people are like, what on earth are you guys talking about? So let's really explain this. What is disability theology?
Exactly. Yeah. And I get that same question all the time in my own comments. People have never heard of it or they don't think it's real. They're like, this is why? Who's doing this? And it is. The best way I can describe it is it's another brand of liberation theology, the critical social theories. I think it was Vodi Bakum that had said that critical social theory kind of functions like a train, right? Where you've got the oppressed versus oppressor, that Marxism is the driving engine, and then the boxcars are all the different identities. And so, of course, disability is one of those boxcars. And because I looked into it as well, and I was thinking, how do I understand this? How do I explain this? And it's almost a copy paste
Mm,
of what you see in critical race theory, gender theory, except now it's disability. It's able bodied versus disabled.
right. And
That's the way they see it.
you see that a lot, even if people haven't heard of disability theology, you do see that in descriptions. Like, I remember there was a quote from Jen Hatmaker from years ago where she said, I'm a married, white, cisgender, able-bodied. So when you hear that phrase able-bodied, that's part of the disability theology that we're talking about. And I guess, maybe comment on this as well, because the way I see it is it's almost like it's shifting things to say, like, for example, we talked about, I don't know how much you want to share about your daily life, but you experience a lot of pain. You experience things that are more challenging for you than they are for me. And so in disability theology, that would almost be like, we're not going to see that as something negative. We're going to turn that into a positive and say, well, this is who you are, and we just need more inclusion. And so you don't want to see that disability as a negative thing. Like even in the Christian circles, I'm even seeing it creep in where people would say, well, we shouldn't pray to be healed of things because I'm perfect just as I am. And this is kind of that true authentic self that we see everywhere, but just applied to disability.
Exactly. It is. And a lot of it comes from the way that they view disability. There's essentially, and it comes from the secular disability rights movement. There are multiple models of what they call it of disability. And what we're used to is what they call the medical model, right? So, like you said, I've got chronic pain. This is my diagnosis. I go to the doctor for XYZ, and that's what makes me disabled. But there's also what they call the social model. And then the social model, which is what they're using, it's not the diagnosis that's disabling. They'll make a distinction and call that the impairment. What's disabling is that society is not built for me.
Oh,
Society is
okay.
not built with disability in mind. So they will say it's not the diagnosis that's disabling, it's the fact that buildings don't have ramps or elevators or, things are not made with neurodivergence in mind and whatever else. And it's the surrounding culture, attitudes, physical barriers that are what is truly disabling. And they actually get criticized for that a lot because, exactly, like I'll use myself as an example. You could have a perfectly accessible environment. That's not going to change my physical pain.
Right. Yeah.
That's, that's not going to change everything. It may help some things, may help a lot of things, but there are certain physical realities that it just doesn't change. And the social model falls short there. And then there's the concern that people may not want to seek medical care because then it's like you're giving into the quote unquote oppressors to try to become able-bodied, the same way we see in critical race theory, right? That proximity to whiteness,
Mhm.
or in the gender theory, proximity to, what do they call it? Heteronormativity.
I wrote the word heteronormative down because it sounds like what you're describing is exactly what we see in the LGBTQ conversation under like
Yes.
radical gender theory or, queer theory is that the oppressive force is the heteronormativity. I was even thinking about this today. And it's like, well, heterosexuality is normative. I mean, if you're a biblical Christian, our bodies are made a
Yes.
certain way. And so it's the critical theories, maybe intermixed with a bit of liberation theology that convinces people, well, heteronormativity isn't fair. The world is kind of, orchestrated around that. And so in your case, in the disability theology, it would be, I don't know what the word would be, but it would be like able-bodied normativity or something that is the
Yeah.
oppressor. Would that be kind of accurate?
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, and so when you're saying that, because I'm still trying to get my head around this a little bit. I see it, but I don't have words. You got to give us the words. But when you said, part of the idea behind that is that society's not built for me. So I was doing a little bit of research before we got on our call tonight, and I just put. In fact, I want to recommend people do this. Put the word disability into your Instagram search bar. Put it into your YouTube or if you're on TikTok, put it in there. And a bunch of stuff, I mean, it was not hard to find. It was like disability justice was
Yes.
everywhere. So I found this,
Yes,
like,
it
this is
is.
just from a random page. It said, a core part of disability justice is radical love and acceptance of our whole selves. We draw power from embracing our disabilities and now, shocker, genders, because that's going to get thrown in there as well as under that umbrella of critical theory. Everybody thinks you can just do one, like you can just talk about race under that umbrella or just about, no,
Nope.
it's all together. So it says embracing our disabilities, genders, and beings in all of our expansiveness in this transformative power that we pull from to build the social, political, and economic landscapes of our world, which we truly deserve. And then you could see, like, on this one person's page, all over it is like, the free Palestine, all of the social justice talking points, but just applied
Yes,
to disability.
it is. And I even recently made a post about this too, that there is an underlying assumption that if you are disabled, you are automatically an ally to every other social justice talking point.
Oh, wow.
Automatically.
Yeah.
One of
That's
the
what I saw.
pillars,
I saw that when I was researching. It was just like
yes,
everything all together.
and one of the pillars of disability justice, for example, is that because you have a disabled body, you are inherently anti capitalist. I read that and I thought, no, I'm not.
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah.
not inherently anti cap. Says who? Anti capitalist. But that's one of their pillars. There's 10 pillars of disability justice. And even within that, you will see commitment to cross movement organization.
What does that
So
mean?
you basically, it's that underlying assumption that you are automatically an ally to all of the other
Oh,
social
okay,
justice
got it.
movements. Yeah.
Okay, I'm looking
But
up here
then
10
they're also
principles.
supposed to be an ally to the disability community.
Just the other day, I was looking at a comment under one of my posts, and somebody wanted to know my makeup routine. They said, I love your makeup. What do you use? And I'm here to tell you that a lot of the makeup that I use on a daily basis comes from Adele Natural Cosmetics. This is a Christian founded, family owned cosmetics company where all of the products are natural. They're not going to use all of the fake dyes and perfumes that disrupt your endocrine system or your hormones. It is beautiful, beautiful cosmetics. And I would say that the bronzing stick, the glow stick, And I have several of their lipsticks that I use absolutely every single day. I don't think a day goes by where I don't use that bronzing stick and the glow stick. It is just the perfect little sheen, and the lipsticks are so beautiful, and the formula is buttery and it stays emollient, but it doesn't feather and it doesn't dry out. It's just awesome. In fact, today I'm wearing the nude lipstick, which is my go-to. It's like the perfect amount of pink, not too orange, not too cool, not too warm. So, so good. So if you want to try them out, go to AdeleNaturalCosmetics.com. That's spelled ADEL, naturalcosmetics.com. Use my code Alisa for 25% off your first time order. Again, that's AdeleNaturalCosmetics.com. Use my code Alisa. Right. Okay, so I just looked this up, 10 Principles of Disability Justice. This is interesting. Okay, so let me make a few comments and then I want to throw it back to you. But when I've been researching like the critical social justice, the definition of justice seems to be different than obviously biblical justice, which if you really look at how justice is treated in the Bible, it starts with the character and nature of God, who justice is one of his attributes. And if you look about how that plays out all through scripture socially, you have the idea of, of course, standing up for the truly oppressed, right? You have the idea of rewards matching the behavior and then punishments matching the crime. There's different crimes, different punishments for different crimes, different rewards for different behaviors. That's all throughout the Old Testament law. Even heaven, store up your treasure in heaven. There's different
Right?
experiences people are going to have in heaven. Whereas, according to the critical theories, justice kind of flows along the lines of Marxism, where it's like equal outcome. So, and I think that might help our audience understand where this disability justice is coming from when you say this world was not built for me, and it's like the abled normativity that's seen as oppression, because justice would be an equal outcome. So you would have to have, for it to be quote unquote justice, you would have to have the exact same ability to maybe go to a theme park as an able-bodied person would. And that wouldn't just be like a polite and courteous thing. I think they should do that. They should make that available. But it becomes a justice issue because of this definition of justice being equal outcome. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I've even seen it was in a Zoom call or Zoom meeting of some kind, but there was even someone made the comment that it would be a disability justice issue. Let's say if a blind man wanted to be a pilot, that disability justice would be true disability justice is to accommodate and modify so that a blind man who wants to be a pilot could do that.
Wow.
And my first thought is, I'm not getting on that plane. I'll drive.
Yeah.
Because it's like we're totally just disregarding reality. The
Mm.
reality is that yeah, there's going to be certain things I just can't do.
Right. And how do they work that out? If you just follow that logic all the way to its end, what is actually going to happen when the blind person gets in the pilot seat? Do they think that far? What's the thinking?
The ultimate hope would be that technology and everything that goes into flying could be modified in such a way that the blind man could do it and do it safely. So they're
Mm.
not thinking like, we're just going to let a blind guy fly a plane and crash and, all the passengers are about to meet their maker. No, their line of thinking is truly that disability justice would mean that you accommodate
Mhm.
so that he could do that.
Yeah.
That's how they're seeing it versus I would say for me, like, there's just certain things I can't do. I wouldn't apply, let's say, to be a paramedic because I can't get on the floor and pick up, let's
Yeah.
say, a 200-pound man that collapsed.
Right.
And I'm well aware of that.
And neither could
And there's
I.
no amount of modifying that would change that.
Yeah. Well, and frankly, there's things I can't do. I'm able-bodied,
Certainly.
but there's things I can't do. And I think honestly, this is why I'm very concerned about them even lowering the standards when it comes to law enforcement and firefighters for women. I mean, hey, I'm kind of one of those people that's like, if a woman can get in there and lift as much as a dude and if she can carry my husband out of a window, fine. But don't lower
Right.
the standards so that more women can do it. That's not justice to me. That's actually the opposite of justice, because then you're endangering people's lives, and we've seen the repercussions of that. But let's go through these 10 principles of disability justice, because this is really interesting. The first one, at least on this list I have here, is intersectionality. And for anyone who's
Yes.
unfamiliar with what that is sort of the approach under the critical theories of like what are the intersections of oppression that you hold. So like, for example, me, I'm white, so I don't have that intersection, but I'm female, so I've got the one. I'm not LGBTQ, so I pretty much just have like one category of intersectionality, whereas you would
Yeah.
have two, because you're a woman and you're disabled. But like a
Yep.
gay white disabled woman would have one more intersectionality than you, and then a black disabled gay woman would have even more. And so it just keeps on going down the line. You kind of collect these identities and these intersections, and then according to this theory, that gives you more moral authority to speak to things like justice issues. And what would you add to that?
Absolutely. The one thing I would add to that though is that there's this assumption that when you listen to the most marginalized, they're all going to say the same thing. So, for example, um, I don't know how much people know about Disney World, but they've got a DAS pass. It's a disability access pass. It's basically, if you remember the old like lightning lane, where you could get a return time to physically wait somewhere else and then come back to the line. And they made restrictions to that because they said, no, this is designed for like kids that are profoundly autistic and truly cannot understand the concept of waiting in a line.
Hmm.
So a lot of people that once qualified no longer do. I'm one of them. I no longer qualify
Really?
because I can wait in a line,
Wow.
even if I'm waiting in my wheelchair. So that's fine. But the amount of disabled creators that said Disney needs to change this, they're in the wrong. And the one thing I saw was clearly they did not consult anyone who is disabled about this. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, all right, let's say they consulted me. I don't think the changes are necessarily wrong. They're not saying you can't come to the park. Everything else is physically accessible to you. They're just saying you've got to physically wait in line like everybody else because there were too many people taking advantage of this.
Wow. That's so interesting.
So I'm like, all right, would you be cool with me, let's say, consulting with Disney and saying that these changes are acceptable, maybe even necessary? Or are you saying this because you didn't get the response you were hoping for? You didn't get, right? They made these changes. You don't like that. That's what you're really mad about. Because again, there's this assumption that, of course, the most marginalized are going to think a certain way.
Hmm. Yeah. That goes to the second point, which is the leadership of the most impacted. And I've even heard it in other streams called, leading from the margins. In
Yes.
That's another from that Jen Hatmaker quote. Well, actually, I think it was Sarah Bessey who had an article where she was talking about some of these topics, and she was like, "I'm not your guide. I'm not the best guide for you. You need to go to the margins." So it's this idea that leadership from the margins. There's an anti-capitalistic politic, which you mentioned. And you also mentioned the commitment to cross movement organizing, recognizing wholeness. So that they said people have inherent worth outside of commodity relations and capitalistic notions of productivity. Well, of course, that's kind of strange to me. Like, of course they do. We have
Right.
the Bible tells us every human's been made in the image of
That's
God.
exactly
That's not because of capitalism, but that's
right.
interesting
No,
that they
that
would
that's
pit that
that's
against them.
exactly it. And I at one point I did a short series, maybe I'll have to bring it back, where I went through these points to look at what is or is not biblical about it. Of course, 90%
Oh
of it's
wow.
not biblical, but that specific point is we are made in God's image, and anybody with a biblical worldview should already know that and be thinking that way.
Yeah, yeah.
And of course, we're talking about a secular movement. So, of course, the secular world doesn't think that way. And
Yeah.
they're fighting it to, again, with capitalism, what you can and can't do or produce. But I don't think, I don't think socialism is any better in that right.
As a parent, I'm always thinking about what will shape my kids' hearts and minds because so much of the content out there today is shallow, confusing, and sometimes even really opposed to a biblical worldview. This is why I love what Brave Books is doing. You know, when my kids were real small, it seemed like so many of the shows that were aimed at them had kids that were disrespecting their parents. They were curating a very short attention span. They weren't at all supporting the biblical values that I was trying to teach my kids. And that's why now with my grandkids, we have given them so many Brave Books because Brave Books partner with voices like Kirk Cameron, Frank Turek, our friend Melissa Doherty, to captivate your kids' imagination with great stories that help promote good character traits like I had when I was a kid. I remember we had books that were about loyalty and honesty, and that sort of went away. Well, Brave Books is bringing it back. They also have a streaming platform called Brave Plus, which is wonderful. So right now, you can go to bravebooks.com/Childers and get 20% off your first purchase with the code Childers. Again, that's bravebooks.com/Childers. Use the code Childers for 20% off. Yeah, yeah. Well, that's for sure. So, do you have a piece of content up somewhere where people can watch you go through these 10 points?
If you go, yes. So I did it as like a series probably about a year ago if you go on my Instagram page.
Okay. All right. So we'll definitely link to your Instagram page here as well because you're doing a great job with all your reactions. You're funny too. I like that you have a lot of humor. But I want to talk about how this is creeping in the church because
Yes.
that's what's really relevant for my audience. And so I think to my knowledge the most popular book that is really promoting these ideas is one that people may be familiar with and they didn't realize was having to do with disability theology. And that's a book called My Body is Not a Prayer Request: Disability Justice in the Church. There you go. She's got it right there. So tell us about, I have not read this book. So tell us about this book. And like, this was a pretty popular book. It looks like it was endorsed by Sojourners, which is a progressive Christian outlet.
Yep.
Um, I don't know how popular it was, but oh yeah, okay. All the progressives are endorsing this. We have Lisa Sharon Harper, Sarah Bessey. Yeah, this is something that was endorsed by progressive Christians. It looks like it's not selling too terribly. Did it sell pretty well when it first came out?
Yeah, it actually did. And I actually got it from my denomination.
From
I
your
will,
denomination?
yes, I
Oh.
will say, now my denomination is not progressive.
Mm-hmm.
There have been some churches on the other side of my state that wanted to have LGBTQ deacons serving in the church. And so there was a big issue at our synod about what do we do with that? Are we going to accept that or not? Thankfully, my denomination voted to stick to a biblical sexual ethic and said, like, no, we're not, if
Yeah.
you want to do that, then you need to split off and do your own thing. To my knowledge, they have not at this point. But I will say that my own personal home church is very solid biblically. Yeah, they're not going down the progressive road at all,
Mm-hmm.
which is, we actually read in our women's Bible study your book, Another Gospel,
Oh, wow. That's cool.
recently. Yes.
Very
But
cool.
the larger denomination was encouraging Bible study or book studies, not Bible studies, book studies with this book. And
Mm.
so they were offering a free one. And I serve as a disability advocate for my church. And actually now for my region of my denomination as well. Um, and I haven't done a whole lot, but I haven't had a lot of people come forward and say they needed me to advocate for anything in particular. But when this book came around, I said, all right, I will join this book study because I want to critique the book.
Wow.
I want to see what's really going on in this because I could just tell from the title something's not right with this.
Mhm.
There's
Yeah.
something wrong with this. What's something wrong? And actually, the author, Amy Kenny, is the one that John Cooper was referencing when you mentioned me a couple months ago.
Oh, wow.
Amy Kenny. And I saw her on the Holy Post podcast. I did
Really?
a couple of responses. Yes. So her video is like 2-ish years old. And if you go on my Instagram, probably within the last month or two, I did a couple of responses because what she claims is it's outright heretical.
Well, tell us a little bit about the book. I'm seeing here she was on Jen Hatmaker's podcast as well. Like, give us a
Yep.
rundown of what she's arguing in the book, because like, if you look at that cover, you're thinking, especially a church that's like, we don't quite know what to do, but we want to be welcoming to people with disabled. We want to make it, we have a couple issues in our family that it was very helpful that our church had a special needs set up when they were
Totally.
younger. I'm trying to keep it vague, but yeah, it was very helpful. And so I know that there are a lot of churches that are thinking this through. There's a lot of families actually that can't necessarily attend church due to
Yeah.
certain things that aren't set up at the church. So I can sympathize with a church that might be going, man, we really want to be better at this. And then along comes this book and they're like, oh, perfect. Now we have our resource, but they don't realize that it's really undermined by bad theology. So give us the
It,
rundown.
it it is. So it is. It's disability justice within the church. So those same pillars, but how you apply those things in basically into the church. And she goes through her big thing is not praying for healing. That's why the title is My Body is Not a Prayer Request. So she gives a lot of anecdotal personal stories of Christians that would pray for her to be healed and walk out of her wheelchair. Now,
Mm,
I could sympathize with her that certainly if you're out, let's say just minding your business at a Costco and
mm.
someone stops you to say, I feel led by the Lord. I want to pray for you right now, deliver you from that spirit of infirmity. I mean, I would probably look at you and be like, I
Like,
am not the one.
I just want a milkshake, okay? I'm just here for
Right.
a pretzel, please. Yeah.
Yeah, like, I want my free samples, and that's
Yeah.
about it,
Yeah,
alright? Like, move along. So, I
right.
could certainly sympathize with some of those things, but then in the church, I mean, she wants to totally upend some of the theology. The way that she twists scripture, and I've even said, at best, it's a gross misreading of the text, and at worst, it's blatantly deceptive,
Mm.
some of the things.
Yeah, so
Uh,
let me get back to the book in a second here, but you've mentioned an interesting point because on one hand, I could see this being an overreaction to the prosperity gospel because you have
yes,
prosperity gospel that's like, oh, it's always God's will to heal. And Ella, if you're in that wheelchair, then there's something you're not either accessing of God, you have sin in your life, or you don't have enough faith, or you're not, working the steps like you're supposed to, depending on who you ask. And so the prosperity gospel can actually be entirely oppressive to people because someone in your situation, like, yeah, could God pull you out of that wheelchair today? We both know he could if he chose to do
sure,
that. And there's nothing wrong with asking for that. But there comes a point in time when you get to the prosperity gospel that, I mean, I would imagine it would be exhausting if that happened to you every time you're just trying to get a coffee at Starbucks
absolutely.
and people are like, I want
Absolutely.
to, deliver you. And so I could see an overreaction being like, well, my body's not a prayer request. And it's like, those are two opposite extremes, neither of which are biblical.
Correct. Absolutely. And that was, I mean, the one thing she says that I actually agree with her on is she makes the point that even churches that are not explicitly prosperity churches still have that theology creeping in.
Oh yeah. I mean, prosperity gospel has crept in everywhere. I remember back in, I
Yes,
mean, especially I think people are correcting it more now, but even maybe like 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it was in everything. And I think it really seeped into a lot of places you wouldn't expect it to that are still recovering and trying to make corrections.
absolutely. So that's one point she makes. She says that in the Holy Post podcast. I think she says that with Jen Hatmaker too, and in this book. And I'm like, That's a valid point. The prosperity gospel is everywhere to the point, I mean, just any little thing where you think your relationship with God is transactional, it comes
Mhm.
from that line of thinking,
Yeah.
right? Just thinking that if I do A, God will do X. Well, you don't know that, not
Yeah.
necessarily. So I can certainly agree that, you know what, yeah, a lot of churches that you would not think are prosperity churches still have that. And that's the theology that becomes a problem
Yeah.
because, yes, God absolutely, he could put me into a deep sleep tonight, grow my arms out by tomorrow morning. But is he going to do that? Likely, I don't think he will. Not at least this side of heaven.
Yeah. So, what are some of the scriptures that she uses to make her points? Well, this year, America turns 250 years old, and I love celebrating my country by buying my meat from Good Ranchers because every cut of meat that comes from goodranchers.com is born, raised, and harvested right here in the US. But that's not all. It's packaged here, their customer service team is here, and it's really easy, by the way. If you subscribe to one of their boxes, you can go on the website, you can delay your box, you can skip a box, you can cancel. They make it very easy, and it's just the best meat you'll ever have. I personally love the convenience of being a Good Ranchers subscriber. In fact, the other day, my son wasn't feeling so well, and he wanted some beef stew. That's kind of his go-to comfort meal, but I didn't have any stew beef. So you know what I did? I went into my freezer and I got 4 of my big bone-in steaks from Good Ranchers, and I made the beef stew out of those steaks. It was honestly the best beef stew I've ever had, if I do say so myself. But they made it so easy. I didn't even have to go to the store because I had the pantry items available, and then the meat's just sitting right there waiting for me in the freezer. And it is grass-fed beef that is the highest possible quality. So if you want to give Good Ranchers a try, go to goodranchers.com today. And when you start your subscription, you're going to get to pick a free meat that will be included in every order for the life of your subscription. Plus, you're going to get $25 off your first order using my code Alisa. Go to goodranchers.com today and use my code Alisa.
So one of them, and she mentioned this in the Holy Post podcast, I made a response to it, is I believe it's Mark 9:43, where Jesus says that if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off.
Sermon
If
on the
your
Mount,
eye
yeah.
causes Yes, if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. Well, so the crux of disability theology is reading disability into the Bible.
Yeah,
Reading the Bible through that lens of, I hate the phrase lens of, it's so cliche, but
yeah.
still, reading the Bible through that perspective or that worldview of disability. So then when you read something like now this passage in Mark 9, now it's about disability because the person ends up amputated, right? Or partially blind. And she actually says, she reads into that what if your disability is like a special encounter with God,
Mm,
or that it's, or how does she say it, a remedy against temptation.
mm. Because I mean,
And
there's a sense in which God can use your disability and he's turning all things for good for those who love him
certainly,
and are called according to his purpose. So I can see why that would be tricky because to a certain extent, every type of suffering I've gone through has made me stronger and has made me draw closer to the Lord and cling more to his word. And so there's a sense in which that is true, but it's interesting when I've just pulled this up here in Mark 9, it's also in Matthew. It says, if your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off, for it is better for you to enter life crippled than to have 2 feet and be thrown into hell. And but this isn't about disability. It's
no.
about sin, and you'd have to be reading disability into it to make it say that.
Exactly. And when I first heard her quote, I thought this is Gnosticism. If you're
Mm,
thinking that disability grants you some close encounter to God with God, that's Gnosticism.
Right, and Gnosticism, for our audience, if anyone's unfamiliar, I mean, there's various iterations of it. It was an early heresy in church history, but ultimately kind of characterized by the idea that salvation comes by secret knowledge. So they had these Gnostic gospels where Jesus is saying all of this secret information that if you can have that knowledge, that's really what's going to save you, rather than grace, being saved by grace through faith. And so that, yeah, that is very Gnostic too. It's like but you know what? That's why Vodi Bakum called the whole critical race theory, ethnic Gnosticism. It's like
Yes.
you're essentially saying that this particular group has access to more knowledge about God, this secret knowledge that I can't have, that you can have, and that is very Gnostic. That's an interesting point.
It is. Or even this idea that it's somehow a remedy to for temptation. Like if you are disabled, you're maybe not as tempted to do certain things. And I've said this in my response. I'm like, but that doesn't make sense. That doesn't mean that I somehow need Jesus and salvation any less. Just
Right.
because I don't sin the same way. Fine. I'm not going to rob a bank. I can't run away, right?
Yeah.
Let's be real. I'm not running.
Yeah.
I'm not, but that doesn't mean that somehow my disability is like keeping me from temptation.
Right, you're still capable of pride and lust and, hatred
Certainly.
and envy and all of that. It's interesting that, yeah, and what you'd also what's very interesting to me too is people who are more progressive leaning are always going on about how we're so literalistic in the way we read scripture. And yet, like, you'd have to take this literally in order to make that case, because Jesus isn't actually saying to amputate your limbs. This is
No.
him saying, flee temptation, whatever you have to do. If your computer is causing you to sin, throw it away. Don't have one.
Yep.
Don't have the things that are causing you to sin and tempting you. So, okay. And then another passage that I saw when I was kind of poking around trying to figure out what's going on with this thing was Luke 14 and the parable
Oh
of the
yeah.
great banquet. So I'm going to read this and then I want you to comment on this, because I just want to invite our audience. Imagine if you'd never heard this conversation, you probably wouldn't think about disability with this parable. But now I want you to think about reading disability into it. And I bet you'll be able to, now that you know how that is working. So it says this: when one of those at the table with him heard this, he said to Jesus, "Blessed is one who will eat at the feast in the kingdom of God." Jesus replied, and now he's going to do the parable. "A certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is now ready.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said, 'I have just bought a field and I must go see it. Please excuse me.' Another said, 'I've just bought 5 yoke of oxen and I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me.' Still another said, 'I just got married, so I can't come.' The servant came back and reported this to his master. Then the owner of the house became angry and ordered his servant, 'Go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame.' 'Sir,' the servant said, 'what you ordered has been done, but there is still room.' Then the master said to his servant, 'Go out into the roads and the country lanes and compel them to come in, so that my house will be full. I tell you, not one of those who were invited will get a taste of my banquet.'" So he's basically saying, and this, of course, as it is with many of Jesus' parables, is him talking about the Jews rejecting him and then bringing the Gentiles in. But how is this read in the disability theology paradigm?
Well, they take verse 21, that last part that you read, go out and invite the poor, lame, blind, and they take it literally. They, even though this is part of a parable, they take that literally and extrapolate that to mean, see, Jesus is for disability inclusion in the church. He himself said, go invite the disabled. See, God says, my house is not full without them. So
Mm,
you need to do A, B, and C for disability inclusion. And what Amy said, Amy Kenny's the author of this book, if anyone's wondering who I'm talking about. What she said on the Holy Post podcast that made me, I mean, viscerally upset. I like wanted to throw my computer. I was so mad. She said, Jesus says to invite the poor and disabled people first.
mm.
No, he does not.
No, yeah.
That's why I said, at best, this is a blatant, or At best, it's a gross misreading of the text. And at worst, it's blatantly deceptive. So it's
Mhm.
like either you don't really know what you're reading or you are lying to make a point.
Yeah. I've noticed this, especially with Jesus' parables. So many people try to turn these into social justice parables. It's
Yep.
really just it's a thing somebody needs to talk more about and do more work on the parables because, you know, um, I've watched even chapel services in some colleges that are going left and progressive, where there's a series on the parables, and every one of them is a social justice interpretation, which is not faithful to the text at all.
No, it's not.
So, yeah. Okay. So I noticed here in the description of her book, it says, much of the church has forgotten that we worship a disabled God. Talk about that.
Mm. Yeah. That is, I would say, at the core of disability theology. Even even more core than reading disability into the scriptures, they believe that Jesus himself is disabled because he resurrected and he still had the crucifixion wounds.
Hmm.
They take that one. I always thought it was in Acts. This is my mistake. I said it on TZ Cannon's podcast, True Comfort podcast. It's actually in John. My apologies for that. But where Jesus shows his wounds to Thomas as
Hmm.
evidence that he indeed resurrected. He was crucified, now he's alive. And they say that he was impaired by the cross. And they
Boy, that's
believe
tricky.
that we then worship a disabled God. In
Wow.
fact, in fact, I wish I had the original on me, but there's a book called The Disabled God. Let me get it in frame. Written by Nancy Eastland, back in like the early mid 90s when critical theory was sort of just becoming
Hmm.
a thing. It was just after the civil rights movements, just after the ADA was passed, Americans with Disabilities Act. So she wrote The Disabled God, and then this book is essentially revisiting it. But this author, too, Lisa Powell, progressive.
Wow. Yeah, because if you think about the scriptural approach to Jesus' resurrected body, there's no implication at all that this is some kind of a disability or an impairment, but his body is actually glorified. It is seen as something that we have to look forward to because it's a glorified state. So it's like the scars that he has are they mark the identity of Jesus. They mark like it's the roadmap of what he accomplished for us, but that doesn't mean he's impaired in any way. In fact, he's
Correct.
described as glorified.
Yes. But that is the like at the crux of it because similar with other social justice movements, right? Jesus has to personally identify with everybody's demographic. That's where they will say that Jesus is a woman or God is a woman
Yeah.
or that God is queer. I've even heard um I forgot where it is, but the scripture verse that God's ways are higher than ours,
Hmm.
not like ours. I've seen that extrapolated and then concluded that God is neurodivergent.
Oh my goodness.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or that God is autistic. Um, another one that
This is so infuriating. Like,
I
why
know,
can we this is why we can't have nice things. Come on, people.
seriously. I mean, and even in this book, she also, I mean, I've got notes galore in this that she, what is it? She looks at Daniel's vision, Daniel 7. She takes Daniel 7, verse 9. And when Daniel visits the clouds of heaven, he describes how the throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. That's Daniel 7 9. So Amy Kenny goes on to say, a chair with wheels sounds a lot like a wheelchair to me.
Wow.
So instead of this is God's chariot, or this is, this extravagant vision of what his throne may be like, she says it's like a wheelchair.
That's so irresponsible. I mean, I'm trying to be kind, but that is,
It,
this is
yeah,
classic liberation theology
it is.
where you're reading a particular minority status into the text of scripture and making it say what it doesn't say. I mean, I was just reminded of Philippians 3:21 about the resurrected body, where it says, who by the power that enables him to bring everything under his control will transform our lowly bodies so that they will be like his glorious body. So the Bible
Mhm.
is juxtaposing our, what we even fully abled body is called lowly, and then we will be
Yes.
transformed into a glorious body, not an impaired body, not a disabled body. And that's just such an irresponsible thing to put onto the text.
It is. I've got where I sort of bracketed off and I just wrote no in the margin
No. Yeah.
because she writes, Jesus on the cross is disabled, physically impaired by sweating drops of blood while nailed to a wooden stake. Jesus is also disabled in a social sense. A person who was crucified bore the weight of social stigma in the ancient world, highlighting the social model of disability. Remember I brought that up in the
Right.
beginning where
Yeah.
you are disabled by your environment. So that's what she's saying here. And then she goes off or goes on to say Jesus inverts all our shame and preconceived notions of what power looks like into a cross. Jesus disables himself on our behalf. This goes directly against our notions of self preservation and victory by demonstrating how God's power is self emptying, radically forgiving, and displayed through disability. The disabled Christ is the definitive revelation of God to humanity. The disabled body is the source of our redemption.
Wow.
And I just wrote no in the margin. I'm
Yeah.
because
No.
I don't know whether to be like mad and throw this book out the window or I can't believe what
Yeah.
I'm reading.
So who's she influenced by? Who does she quote in her book? Like,
She
is there like
quotes
a theme of that, or of who, people she's kind of leaning on their work, or?
a lot more of disability theology. You'd be surprised how much of this is out there.
Mm,
There's the disabled God. There's let's see, I've brought a few more. I have this book that I started reading called The Bible and Disability. It's a commentary, but same thing. It gets into all of the social justice that it's so infuriating and it's just hard to read. It's a lot of words that say nothing,
hmm.
that
So do they
really just
teach that?
don't make a point.
Would she say that you will be disabled in heaven?
Yes. Yes,
How does
that
that
is a
make you feel?
huge debate. Yeah. In disability theology, a lot of people, that's a huge source of debate, actually, because you have, on the one hand, Christians saying, this is who I am. How could I not have my disability in heaven? So they would say, like someone like me, that I'm born with my disability, right? So if you fundamentally change that about me and you change my DNA, am I still the same person? And then on the other hand, you have people that typically it's more people that, let's say, have acquired their disability later in life, or it's something very painful. Like I've got chronic pain too. And it's like, why would I want this for
Hmm.
eternity?
Well, it's an interesting point you just brought up about, because you're born with the disability, and the debate is how much of this is me. That
Yep.
seems to be a fundamental misunderstanding of human nature. And so that has me asking questions like, what is their view of original sin and the fall?
It's funny you mentioned that. In her book, she has these top 10 lists at the beginning of most of her chapters. Um, like top 10, here's her top 10 microaggressions, things of that nature. And one of them is her top 10 explanations as to why she's disabled. And at the bottom of the list is the statement Adam and Eve sinned. And I read that and I'm thinking, but that's a true statement. That's
Yeah.
accurate. Adam and Eve did sin. And it's the reason our entire reality is fundamentally what it is. But again, in disability justice, any notion, any connection to sin is oppressive.
Mhm. I was gonna say,
So
'cause,
to
like,
eat,
would in general disability theology, would they say that, if Adam and Eve had not sinned, would there still be disabled people?
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
That's
they
what they would
they
say.
absolutely they would because they see it as diversity of God's creation. That's how
So
they
do
see
they
this.
use but they still use the word disability?
They do. They do. They like to, because in the secular disability justice movement is sort of reclaiming that word disability. And
Mm,
to some extent, I get it because when, through like the 80s and 90s, we went through the euphemisms like special needs. There was, what was there, differently abled. And I get it to that things like that, they're meaningless euphemisms.
mhm.
I can't go to my job and say that I'm differently abled or special needs. That doesn't mean anything. Versus saying, no, I have a disability. This is what it is. These are the accommodations that I need to do my job successfully. That carries much more authority.
Yeah.
So yeah, they will
Hmm.
still, but disability is just part of diversity as opposed to being something negative.
Right. Okay, so I wanna ask you a couple of questions, real practical questions for churches. Because as I mentioned before, we want to be places that help people to be able to come together with the body of Christ if they need that help. So how can churches do better in this area without falling into the ditch of disability theology?
Definitely, we've got to be physically accessible as much as possible. What I say to churches, and again, I'm not reading disability into the Bible, but I do look at Mark 2 1 through 12. The paralyzed man brought to Jesus that it was so crowded, they tore a hole in the roof.
Mhm.
And so what I will say, and I've said this to my own church. I've said this, I have no problem saying this to pastors, church leadership, whatever. If you truly believe, right, as you should with a biblical worldview, that all people are created in the image of God, even with a disability. All people are sinners in a fallen world, even with a disability. And all people desperately need Jesus and to hear the gospel, even with a disability. Are you willing to tear the roof off to bring someone to Christ?
Mm.
I don't see, because even that passage, people will see that as like a blueprint for inclusion. And I cringe at that word because we know that inclusion tends to mean something else
Mhm.
with social justice. I know you mentioned that at the Cross Examine Instructors Academy as well. For my presentation is there something else
Like a
to
different word
call
we
it?
could use,
A
yeah, I remember
different,
that, yeah.
like accessible or adapted, something
Yeah.
like that. Um, but yeah, I do think if you truly you're out here to make and equip disciples, what are you willing to do to bring someone to Christ? Forget about, because when the focus is on inclusion, you can forget Christ very easily.
Mm, that's good.
Inclusion is not salvation, and
So good.
inclusion doesn't necessarily lead to salvation.
Right. That's good.
Inclusion is just how you feel in the crowd, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you can feel very included and yet know nothing about Christ or outright reject him.
Yeah, that's a good word. So, are there any good resources that you would recommend for churches? And if not, when will you write one?
Just I may have to write one because, like you said, nobody else is doing this.
You're the only
Honestly,
person I know.
yeah, honestly, the best resource is the word itself.
I love it. The Bible.
Best resource is
Yes.
the Bible itself. Start there. I do think that you can biblically make a case for churches to be accessible. I recently saw a post in a Facebook group that I'm in for disability ministry where people were kind of, like you said, they were doing that debate about churches that do or don't have a disability ministry. And the problem is that the churches that do have that are the big mega churches. I saw
Yeah.
someone recently that, and she's got a big following. She had a big issue with taking her autistic son to smaller Christian churches. And I can feel for that. I get it.
Yeah.
There's a lot that goes into that. But now she's going to Joel Osteen's church.
Mhm.
And I thought,
Yep. This is a
oh
serious
my
dilemma.
goodness,
This is a real dilemma because
it
the
is.
so often churches with really bad theology are the bigger churches that have more infrastructure to be able to have a ministry where a family with a special needs kid could come and
Yep.
have an easier time attending. And maybe that's a and maybe that's something that smaller churches need to think through. Maybe you don't need a big disability ministry, but you just need people who are willing to help and
Yeah.
to provide some sort of a help in some way. I don't have the answer to it, but that is such a good point, Ella, though, because a lot of families with special needs kids especially will make their decision of where they go to church based on whether or not that church has a good special needs ministry.
They do. Or what I saw. So I actually posed this question in the comments in this specific Facebook group. I said, let's say you have two choices. Church one is a mega church. It's Joel Osteen's church, let's say. And they've got your disability ministry. They've got a formal one that works well, whatever. Then you've got the small biblical church that doesn't have the resources for that. They may still be willing to help, but they just don't have that infrastructure. They've got the retired, nice little old lady that really can't chase after kids that are going to, that maybe
Yeah.
aren't verbal and are just going to run out of the room. So what do you do in that scenario? And the most common response was, we just don't go to church.
Mm, yeah. Yeah.
It was
That's
either we don't go
convicting.
or
Yeah.
we're going, where there is a formal disability ministry. And that's a big problem that, we as Christians have to be like, okay, the smaller biblical churches, you may need to re-examine and just see, okay, can we move things around in the budget, let's say, to put in a ramp and start small? Do we
Yeah.
have it in, is there somebody in our congregation with a little special ed experience that's willing to put together a little, I don't know, basket of fidget toys and headphones?
Mhm.
Something. Because I do believe that we can biblically justify accessibility. Absolutely. I think you can look at Mark 2, 1 through 12 and say, see, in the first century, they had nothing but their own two hands. And they tore a hole in the roof to bring someone to Christ, lowered him down on his own mat. You're in the 21st century, likely in the United States of America. What are you willing to do?
Yeah. Well, even just, I
What
don't even know if you need a specific chapter and verse for this. This is just being a Christian and making
yeah.
sure that people can gather together as the scripture commands us to do. Okay, Ella, is there anything that you have wanted to say that you haven't had a chance to say yet as we land the plane here?
Ooh. I think we've covered most of it. Definitely I'll just reiterate that, we need to we need to better equip our Christian disciples with disabilities. We need to equip and have a much more solid theology of this.
Mm.
Like we've said, nobody else is talking about it. We sort of talk about theology of suffering, and it sort of falls under that umbrella, but you've got an entire crowd that says, I'm not suffering.
Mm.
I'm just, yeah. And so we got to really think about that. And as you're responding to the critical social theories, disability is going to be one of them.
Oh, yeah.
And you've got to be ready, you've got to be prepared, and you need a better answer than have more faith, pray about it. You really need a much better response. And that, yes, we need to truly internalize that with or without a disability, We're created in the image of God. We are sinners in a fallen world. We desperately need Jesus. And I think when you do that, then the inclusion is going to follow.
Yeah.
I will say that the most accessible places I've ever been are where the people have a biblical worldview. It's been CIA. It's been the Unshaken Conference. Let me tell you, Frank bent over backwards to
Wow.
make sure CIA would be as accessible to me as possible.
That's so cool. I love that.
So it comes down to worldview.
So good.
It's a worldview before you do anything with the physical barriers, anything. It's how you understand the people around you.
So good. All right, final question. Let us know, and I'll put links too, but where can people connect with you? I know you're on Instagram, the Disapologist, but do you
Yes.
have a website? All of those things.
I sure do. I'm on pretty much all social media platforms. So I've got a Facebook page. Instagram is a big one. I am on TikTok. I'm trying to reach
Yeah.
where my demographic is, and they primarily are on TikTok.
Yeah.
So I'm there as well. I do have a website. Probably need to update it a little bit more, but it's out there. I have email disapologist@gmail.com. Everything is the Disapologist.
Love it. Well, I want to thank my guest, Ella, the Disapologist, for this fascinating conversation. Maybe this is a new topic for you. I hope this was informative and challenging too, and convicting as it was for me. Let's remember as we pursue Christ to keep a sharp mind, a soft heart, and a thick skin. We'll see you next time.
So pray for me and I will pray for you. No turning right or left, we'll make it through. The road that's narrow and the gate that's small. Don't give up, it's gonna be